Welcome to the Digital Dean, where we explore the intersection of education, innovation, and real-world impact. On today's episode, we're going to examine this $50 billion industry with the critical eye it deserves. Whether you're a prospective student, an educator, or someone trying to navigate the changing landscape of higher education, this episode will challenge everything you thought you knew about advanced degrees.
Welcome back to the Digital Dean, where we cut through all the hype and really get to what matters. Today, we're diving deep into something I know a lot of you are thinking about. Is a master's degree even worth it these days? I mean, in today's world.
It's a big question for sure.
Yeah.
A huge decision.
Huge.
Both financially and for your future. And we're going to try to really unpack all this data and help you figure out what matters most.
Exactly. We've got this great article from The Economist that analyzes the value of master's degrees. I think we're going to uncover some really interesting stuff here.
Yeah, I think so too. What really stood out to me right away is this idea that a master's degree isn't some kind of automatic guarantee of success anymore.
Right.
There are so many different things that affect it, like what you study, your individual situation, even gender.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. The article mentions that the cost of getting a master's has just gone through the roof in America. It's tripled since 2000.
Yeah.
Think about that. The average student is taking on $50,000 in debt just for a second degree.
Yeah. And the easy access to loans.
Right.
Both in the US and the UK. That's probably what's driving this price inflation. And it makes you wonder if universities are maybe taking advantage of the situation a little bit.
Yeah. You think this is like an education bubble or something? Are they just pushing these expensive degrees, even if they don't really lead to a good return on investment?
That's a great question. There's this research from Frio OP, they're a think tank, and they focus on policy issues. And they're suggesting that only around 60% of master's programs in the U.S. actually lead to a positive return financially.
Wow.
So that means for 4 out of 10 people, it might not be the smartest move money-wise.
That's a big gamble.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with this whole return on investment thing? What makes some master's degrees worth it and others not so much?
The research really highlights how much it depends on what you actually choose to study. For example, STEM fields in the U.S., things like computer science and engineering, they're still showing really high returns.
That makes sense with all the tech jobs out there.
Yeah.
But then the article throws this curveball. Certain humanities fields in the UK, like history and English, they actually have negative returns. Men with master's degrees in those areas are actually earning less than people who just have a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That is wild.
A couple things might be happening there. Maybe these grads are choosing jobs that just don't pay as much. Maybe because they're really passionate about the field. Or maybe it just takes them longer to find the right job, to really get established. Either way, it's something to really think about.
For sure. So it's not just about getting any master's degree. It's about getting the right one. Which kind of leads me to another point the article brought up, the difference in returns for men and women.
Yeah.
Women are actually more likely to see their earnings go up after getting a master's, even though on average men still have higher salaries overall. How does that even work?
Right. That is kind of a head-scratcher. It seems like women with more qualifications tend to stay working longer, especially after having kids, which you'd think would be the opposite.
I know, right?
You'd think it'd be harder to balance work and family.
Exactly.
So is it that women with master's degrees are just more committed to their careers? Or is there something else going on?
Yeah.
It's hard to say for sure, but it could be that a master's gives women a leg up in the job market, so they're more likely to get hired and keep their jobs even if they need to take time off for family.
Interesting. So it's not just about the money you earn, but also about having a more stable career, which is especially important given all the pressures women face. Okay, let's talk about prestigious programs. The article kind of implied that those big name, super expensive universities might not really be worth the money.
The research did show that except for MBAs, the price of a program doesn't seem to have a big impact on how much people earn later on. But prestige is a tricky thing to define.
Right. It's not just about what you learn. It's about who you meet, the connections you make. Having a degree from a certain university can open doors for you.
Exactly. A degree from a really prestigious school might give you access to this whole network of powerful alumni. Or it might just make people take you more seriously in your field.
So how do you balance those kind of intangible benefits against the very real cost of tuition? It's tough.
It really is. You have to ask yourself, What am I hoping to achieve? What kind of career do I want? And will going to a prestigious school really help me get there, even if it costs a lot more?
Right. So it's about figuring out what's important to you and making the decision that makes sense for your life. So we've talked about this possible education bubble, the difference in returns for men and women, and whether prestige really matters. Now let's get to the big one. How are online learning and AI going to change all of this?
This is where things get super interesting. The article didn't really go into much detail here, but it's something we definitely need to talk about. Like, how will traditional master's degrees compete with all these new, more flexible options?
Yeah. Will employers even care about a traditional master's degree in the future?
Hmm.
Or will these micro-credentials and on-off courses be the new standard?
Who knows?
We're about to find out. But first, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to dig into the wild world of online learning and AI.
Sounds good.
Breaking news. My neural networks have analyzed thousands of podcast listeners and concluded that subscribed viewers are 100% more likely to impress people at dinner parties with random education facts. Don't let my data lie. Smash that subscribe button. Now, let's continue our AI collaboration.
So this whole education bubble thing,
Yeah.
we've all heard stories about people graduating with tons of debt and a degree that's not really getting them anywhere.
Right.
Is that like a really common problem, or are we just focusing on the negative stuff?
Yeah, the article talked about how universities might be encouraging students to get master's degrees even when it's not the best thing for them.
Yeah, and they point out that, especially in the UK, universities are really dependent on the money they get from postgraduate tuition. Like, undergraduate fees are capped over there, so master's programs are a big way for them to make money.
So they're basically encouraged to enroll more master's students. Even if the programs aren't that great, that's kind of scary.
Yeah, a little bit.
What about in the U.S.?
It's a little different here. The article mentioned that the number of college-age people is going down in the next few years.
Oh, really?
So universities might have to fight harder to get students and make money, and that could make master's programs even more important to them.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it still seems kind of messed up, right? Like, are universities more worried about making money than about giving students a good education, one that actually prepares them for the real world?
It's a fair question. Like, if they're just trying to get as many students as possible and make as much money as possible, the quality of the education might suffer.
Exactly. And what about the students taking on all this debt? They're the ones who end up paying the price.
Totally. If a master's degree doesn't help you get a better job or earn more money, then it's just a bad investment for the student. It doesn't matter how much money the university is making.
Okay, so this education bubble thing is definitely something to be aware of. Now let's get back to that gender gap in returns we were talking about. The article said women are more likely to see their earnings increase after getting a master's degree, even though men still make more money on average. It's kind of weird.
It is. The article suggested that women with more qualifications tend to stay in the workforce longer, even after having kids, which seems kind of backwards.
Right.
You'd think it would be harder to keep working with a family.
Exactly. So are women with master's degrees just more dedicated to their careers? Or is there something else going on?
Hard to say for sure, but maybe having a master's degree gives women an advantage when applying for jobs. So maybe they're more likely to get hired and keep their jobs, even if they need to take time off for family.
Huh, that's interesting. So a master's degree could be good for women, not just because of the extra money, but also because it might help them have a more stable career, which is important with all the pressure women face. Okay, let's move on to prestige. The article kind of dissed those famous expensive schools, saying they might not be worth the money.
Yeah, the research showed that except for MBAs, there's no real connection between how expensive a program is and how much graduates earn later on. But prestige is a tricky thing to measure.
Right, it's not just about what you learn, it's about the connections you make, who you know. Like having a degree from a certain school can open doors.
For sure, like a degree from a top school might give you access to this whole network of powerful alumni, or it might just make people take you more seriously in your field.
So how do you weigh those benefits against the cost of tuition? That's a tough call.
Yeah, you got to ask yourself, what are my goals? What kind of career am I looking for? And will going to a prestigious school really help me get there, even if it costs way more?
Right, it's about figuring out what's important to you and making the best choice for your own life. Okay, so we've talked about the education bubble, the differences between men and women, and whether prestige really matters. Now let's get to the really big question. How are online learning and AI going to change all of this?
This is where it gets super interesting. The article didn't say much about this, but it's definitely worth talking about. Like, how are those traditional master's degrees going to compete with all these new, more flexible options?
Right. Will employers even care about a traditional master's degree anymore? Or will things like micro-credentials and online courses be the new normal? It feels like things are changing so fast, like we're on the verge of a totally new way of thinking about education and credentials.
Yeah, definitely. With online learning and all these new AI tools, it's exciting, but also a little scary.
I know, right?
Heck.
Okay, so let's break it down. How could AI actually be used in higher education? Like, what are some real examples?
Okay, well, imagine AI tutors that can adapt to how you learn best. Yeah, they can figure out your strengths and weaknesses and give you personalized feedback.
So instead of sitting in a giant lecture hall with everyone else, you'd have this custom learning experience.
Exactly. And it's not just tutoring. Think about AI that could recommend courses for you
Oh, wow.
based on your skills and interests, maybe even your career goals. It could help you figure out the best way to get where you want to go.
That would be amazing. It would take all the guesswork out of picking a major or a master's program.
Right. AI could even help us predict what the job market will look like in the future, like what skills will be in demand years from now, so you could actually prepare for those jobs.
That's crazy. You wouldn't just be chasing after whatever's hot right now. You'd be ahead of everyone else. But let's be real for a second. AI isn't perfect. There are some potential downsides too, right?
Of course. We have to think about things like data privacy and algorithmic bias, and there's a chance that AI could actually make inequality worse if we're not careful.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't want to create a system where only certain people benefit from AI.
Exactly. We need to make sure AI in education is fair and accessible to everyone.
Okay, so we have this incredibly powerful technology that could revolutionize education,
Yeah.
but we need to be careful and make sure it helps all students.
I think that's a great takeaway. AI is powerful, but we have to use it responsibly.
What are the key things our listeners should remember?
Well, the decision to get a master's is a big one.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong answer. It depends on your field, your goals, your finances, all kinds of things.
And you really need to do your research. Don't just assume a master's is the right move or that a fancy school is always better. Think about what's really important to you.
And as AI becomes more common in education, stay informed about how it's changing things. It's a really interesting time to be figuring out your education and career.
It really is. With so much change happening, it's more important than ever to be a critical thinker and to always be learning and adapting.
I agree completely.
Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining us on The Digital Dean.
A special thanks to our listeners who continue to engage with these crucial conversations about education's evolution. Remember to share this episode with anyone wrestling with the master's degree decision. It might just save them from a very expensive mistake. This is the Digital Dean, reminding you that the best education starts with asking the right questions. See you next time.
Until our next synchronization.